Welcome to the Kolbecast, episode 253. Thank you for joining us. Today, Bonnie and I are joined by author, speaker, and publisher Joseph Pearce. With the release of his newest book, Classic Literature Made Simple, 50 Great Books in a Nutshell, we have the opportunity to talk to Joseph about great works of literature from the Iliad to the present. We also discuss the writing process, how to read great works of literature, and even get a chance to ask him what book he would choose as his must-read for everyone. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, Kolbe homeschooling mom of 4 lads and lasses, liturgical musician, popcorn, and podcast fanatic.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and director of development for Kolbe Academy.
Our guest today needs very little in the way of introduction. I'll just say he's given us all a great and ever-growing gift in the form of teaching, writing, and speaking on topics, people, and matters of importance to us as Kolbe families and people who highly value the true, the good, and the beautiful. He was also one of the brave souls who came on the Kolbecast in its earliest days. So I'm happy to say welcome back to Joseph Pearce. Hello, sir.
Hello, it's good to be back.
We're very glad to get to visit with you today again. So that was episode 49, and here we are more than 200 episodes later. So it's very glad that you have come back to visit with us. I find myself time and again seeing your name come up in relation to material you have published and provided that really helps me as a Kolbe mom in approaching, because I have all high schoolers and one is graduated now. So in approaching the high school curriculum here at Kolbe, I think this will be a great help to many of our listeners today. On the off chance folks aren't quite familiar with you, would you give us a little bit of info about yourself?
Well, yes, I'll give you the 1-minute version. Obviously, as the accent betrays, I'm from the other side of the pond. I was born in England, but I moved to the States 4 days before 9/11, so September the 7th, 2001. So I've been over here now for 23 plus years. I'm a writer, editor, speaker, teacher. I'm currently a visiting professor of literature at Ivy University and a visiting fellow at Thomas More College of Liberal Arts. I teach for Homeschool Connections and keep myself generally busy.
Yes, indeed. You have an extensive list of published works, and you also work as a publisher yourself, editing other people's work. So I'm wondering, what's it like to release a manuscript for publishing? When do you know that it is ready to let go of, other than a deadline that's been set for you? Do you reach a point where you're like, all right, this is finished and I'm going to let it go? What is that like?
Yes, well, first of all, I think there are different types of writers, of course. J.R.R. Tolkien was notoriously fastidious and a perfectionist, which is why he didn't write all that much that was published, because he was such a perfectionist. Other people are much less so. C.S. Lewis churned stuff out. I'm more like a C.S. Lewis than a J.R.R. Tolkien in terms of the churning of stuff out. I'm not a perfectionist. I know when a work has reached the point at which a law of diminishing returns is set in. In other words, the amount of work required to maybe tweak very minor things doesn't make it worthwhile. And then, of course, you sent the manuscript to the publisher in the knowledge, if you have a good publisher, it will then be copy edited and subsequently proofread. So you leave yourself in the safe and capable hands of your good publisher.
Okay. And then on the flip side of that, as a publisher yourself, what's it like to receive a submission from someone?
Well, the important thing, of course, is that the submission is good in terms of writing and presentable. So ideally, sort of double spaced, well typed, well written. If you read the first couple of sentences of a manuscript and there's all sorts of work needs doing, you're not likely to want to read much more. You're going to basically either reject it or send it. Just say, look, this is just not ready for publication. Go back, rework it, and try again later. So obviously, you expect an author to have done all the necessary due diligence and work prior to ending up on your desk. Otherwise, it's not going to get published.
A little curious about that reading, as we'll get into reading great books, I guess, in a little bit here, but does it take, I assume that it takes a different form of reading when you're getting people are sending you all sorts of things. And like you say, some you might say, right, just pick up and realize, okay, let's send that away. And so how have you developed an ability to make it through a bunch of manuscripts without taking all day, every day?
Yeah, well, I've been editing either magazines or being an editor for publishers for quite some time now. That you just get an eye for it, and you know very quickly whether this is something that warrants further reading. And if it does warrant further reading, I'm actually a fairly careful, fairly slow reader because if I'm going to read something, I want to be reading it well. On the other hand, if someone just wants me to read something as in order to sort of give them an idea about whether it's worth pursuing, I can skim read or even just read chunks. So, go down 30 pages, read 2 or 3 paragraphs, and that will give me enough of an idea that this is well written and it's not something that I can publish myself with the sort of things that the publisher I'm working with, the sort of things that I'm involved with. But I can encourage someone that this is worth pursuing and maybe even give them the names of 1 or 2 publishers that might be interested in publishing that sort of manuscript. It's a labor of love, and also actually a labor of patience, because a lot of this is not remunerative. But I remember the days when I was before I had my first book published, and that new writers need help, right? So I try to tell myself that, but I probably spend several hours every week looking at other people's manuscripts for no remuneration. So I do have to be careful because I have to put food on my own family's plate. I have to earn a living, and so I've got to keep things in balance. So if I do find myself becoming inundated at any time, or I get manuscripts at a time where I just don't have time, I will just write a polite, "I'm sorry, I can't help at the moment. Try again in a few months, when I'll come up for air."
Yeah.
I would imagine a lot of folks would be really appreciative of whatever input you can provide for them.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say as well is, there is a satisfaction indirectly to know that but at this point, dozens of books out there that I have not been directly involved in, but I've somehow served as a catalytic converter in some sort of role that I've played with these new authors has enabled them to bring a book to fruition. But there's a satisfaction, even though I'm not involved on a professional level, just to be able to help others. So I know that out there are dozens of works over the last couple of dozen years that are published that wouldn't have been otherwise, and that's gratifying in itself.
Sure. Well, your latest book is Classic Literature Made Simple, 50 Great Books in a Nutshell. It's published by Ignatius Press. And many of the titles in this book are going to ring familiar to our Kolbe families, our Kolbe high school students. What is the inspiration for this book at this time? Why now?
Well, actually, there's a history behind it. So I wanted to be able to introduce great works of literature to people that hadn't read them, and in a way that would at least give them the gist, a little appetizer, so they would know something about it. But the idea was always that it is an appetizer. It doesn't satisfy the appetite. It whets the appetite, because my hope, of course, is they will go back and at least if they go through the 50 and they find 5 or 6 that particularly intrigue them from what I've written, they go and at least read those 5 or 6 books. That would be a step in the right direction. But it actually has its genesis in a series I wrote for Crisis Magazine, called Great Books in a Nutshell, and we got to 50, and I thought, well, that's probably sufficient, and then that became the book.
This is a book that might be very useful to some of our Kolbe parents, especially because we have a lot of, as Bonnie was saying, a lot of these books are coming up in our Kolbe curriculum: the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and many of the Greek tragedies, and sometimes our parents haven't read through them like their children are, and it's a little hard to, if you're managing a bunch of children and don't have time to pick up the Iliad in between things, to be able to, or whatever book, to be able to pick it up and kind of say, okay, maybe here's some questions I can ask my son or daughter, and so it seems like we've tried to do some of that on our podcast here ourselves to try to give people a little sampling of it, but it seems like this is a pocket edition that you could just pull out as, okay, they're reading this, let's see what's going on and start a conversation.
I like that actually, and that's actually sort of thrown open to me a new insight into how the book can have practical use. Because of course, as a parent, and we homeschool ourselves, as a parent, you can read one of these nutshell chapters, 1,000 or so words, and that probably you as a parent could distill from that 2 or 3 questions that you can then ask your child. What about the what's the connection between pride and destructive consequences in the Iliad, right? I mean, what role do the gods play in the Odyssey? And what lessons does Oedipus learn in Oedipus at Colonus? I mean, so you can just read those 1,000 words and probably come up with 2 or 3 decent questions on each of the titles, which you could then use to if you like, deepen your relationship with your child in a conversational sense about the works that they're reading.
Definitely. I was going to mention this later. It's a similar, your book, The Good, the Bad, and the Beautiful, History in 3 Dimensions. That I find that is a similar tool to me as they are approaching, because I have multiple kids in high school, varying areas of history that they're studying. So having that has been a real help to me as well. So anyway, this particular book, the Classic Literature Made Simple, do you have any standout moments or memories along the way of this particular book's creation and publication?
Well, yeah, up to a point, I certainly don't want to sound blasé, and if I do, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. But this is my 30-something book. Something. That's a new word. I just invented a new word. Something.
Yeah,
My 30-something book. And so you sort of take them in your stride somewhat. Now, I remember my first book was published. It was one of the most exciting things that have ever happened in my life, to see your name and your words in print and a handsome looking volume, and then have it reviewed in newspapers. It was astonishing. But you begin to, it becomes just part and parcel of your life. And thanks be to God, I'm not certainly not taking it for granted, as I said, that I'm very grateful every day for the life that God's given me and the blessings He's given me through the gift of writing that I've managed to use to His greater glory, hopefully. But the manuscript was ready. I sent it off, and obviously there's always a little bit of trepidation that the publisher's going to like it or not like it. But once they give the thumbs up, then I sort of just breathe a somewhat sigh of relief and leave it to them, and then they start looking to the next book.
Okay. Along the way, and I think this is mentioned as part of the promotional copy for the book, but I've heard you mention it in a couple of other interviews that you've given about this particular book. The idea of these books being mystical mirrors offering insights into the meaning of life itself. Could you say more about that, especially for those who are new to this particular canon?
Yeah, so first thing I would say is there's a certain type of person who thinks that reading fiction is a waste of time. Give me facts, not fiction. So they're the sort of people that go to a library and hit straight for the non-fiction section and find what they're interested in and get a non-fictional book. And of course, I'm not saying we should not be reading non-fictional books. In fact, just about all of my books are non-fiction, so I'd be committing suicide if I were to tell people that. But what we have to understand is that the great stories hold up a mirror to reality, and it's not just a physical mirror. So if we look in a physical mirror, all that we can see, or we're looking at each other here in this call, all that we can see is the physical surface, right? We can't see what the person's feeling. I suppose up to a point is body language, but generally speaking, I don't know much about anybody's past, what their aspirations are, what their fears are, the extent to which they're trying to do the will of God or otherwise. So in that sense, great literature, great novels, great plays, great poems can show us ourselves on a much deeper mystical level, because it can show us not merely who we are physically, but who we are metaphysically, and not merely who we are metaphysically, but who we should be metaphysically, as distinct from who we are, or who we shouldn't be metaphysically, as distinct from who we are. So you have all of that multifaceted dimension of who we are as human beings that shine forth in these works of fiction that you're not going to get merely by looking at the mere physical facts.
My father-in-law was one of the founders of Thomas Aquinas College and was a kind of my mentor when I was a student there as well. And he would always talk about the best preparation for that sort of great books, liberal education was a student who came in having read a lot of literature and a lot of history because it gives you that rich experience that a normal 18, 17, 18, 19-year-old can't have coming just from the life, most of us at least, the life that we live. So that it opens up the big questions, the experiences, and like you're saying, the effect of our actions over a long period of time that, again, as a young person, you can't get otherwise, really.
Yeah, and one thing that great literature does do, it allows us to see things in their wholeness, in the sense of in their entirety and integrity. So, the danger of much education is you compartmentalizing yourself. So you're learning philosophy. If you're learning philosophy, but you're not learning theology or history or literature, then you basically your philosophy itself is going to be stunted because it's not connected. So the great thing about great literature is you see within the story itself, history, philosophy, theology, humanity, in a good book, an authentic understanding of anthropology. So all of that is present in the reading of a narrative, which can be both entertaining and edifying, but also incredibly educational in terms of making the connections between philosophy, theology, history, goodness, truth, beauty, the wholeness of things.
I know you have spent some time teaching for Kolbe. It's been several years now, but is there anything that I'm missing so far that you would particularly like to highlight in this particular book and what you know of the Kolbe curriculum?
Well, I've designed the book deliberately to be chronological. So, as well as being, should we say, a panoramic overview of the spectrum of genre, it's also a history of literature. So it begins with Homer, and then you have Sophocles, and then Virgil, and then we get into the Christian era and medieval literature, and it goes right through to the last two books, the 49th and 50th, are by authors who are still alive. So, and that's really breaking my rules up to a point because, I talk about the canon of to canonize a book's a bit like canonizing a person. You don't canonize a living person. They're dead first. So the first thing, the canon of the great books should not really be contemporary authors, but authors from the past. And I also, a great book, like a great wine, improves with age. So you should also not even consider something being accepted for the canon until they've been published, I would say at least 50 years. So that would make 1975 or earlier now. So in that sense, I've broken my rules a little bit by having a couple of more modern books. But I also wanted to show that this is a living tradition. It's a continuum. As Chesterton says, that tradition is the democracy of the dead. It's the proxy of the dead and the enfranchisement of the unborn. So this idea of it being a continuum, it's a living tradition. All traditions are living because if they're not living, they're not traditions. They're just part of some archaic history. They become fossils. So all tradition is alive, and so I think having a couple of books by authors that are still around, still alive themselves, does show that this is a living tradition going back now almost 3,000 years and continuing on into the 21st century.
I'd ask you about reading manuscripts, but I mean, I remember the first time I picked up the Iliad, and I had read a lot, but mostly what I had read in high school was a lot of modern fantasy and science fiction and things like that. So it was a new experience to try to pick up the Iliad for the first time and make my way through it, a very different sort of style of writing and storytelling, obviously a poetry actually. But do you have advice for people who are new to some of these great works? I mean, you've provided some newer ones as well, but to go back to some of those, how to approach them or how to struggle with them for the first time.
Well, I think the first thing is we have to not be intimidated. I think many people look at old books from the past and they feel intimidated by them. There's an element of fear, and I like the idea in theory of reading the Iliad or of reading Shakespeare, but in practice, I think it's really a bit beyond me, and it isn't. I mean and that's what this whole classic literature made simple is intended to show that these works are very accessible. They do take effort. So that sometimes I think the trepidation is not so much fear as, quite frankly, laziness. That I don't want to start. It's a beautiful view from the top of that mountain, but the work involved in actually walking to the top of it is more than I can be bothered. I'll take the view from ground zero. Obviously, if we want to be edified, want to see more and see further, or C.S. Lewis say to go further up and further in, then we do have to make the effort to do so. But these works are not difficult. I mean, they are absolutely accessible. That's why all of these could be read, almost all. I had one or two exceptions, but almost all of these books could be read by high schoolers. And if they can be read by high schoolers, they should be able to read by the high schoolers' parents without any too much difficulty.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it just seems different. I mean, there's a difference sometimes. I think I know, like I was saying, the types of books that I was reading, and even still now, I like to pick up a Terry Pratchett novel every once in a while just for fun and have just that enjoyable experience of like watching a little movie or a TV show, basically. But then you've got some of these great works. Well, like I think you're absolutely right. Once you kind of approach them and you get used to them, you become familiar with them, then they become very enjoyable, except then there's this whole depth that you can explore either on your own or in discussions with others. Because, yeah, the last time I picked up the Odyssey, I was just having a hard time putting it down. And that I enjoyed the Odyssey the first time as well, but not in the same way. It's like, okay, now I see all these things. And so, yeah, I think it's that effort probably, like you're saying, and the discipline of building up your reading muscles, I guess, to a certain extent.
I would say two things what you just said there. First of all, many people think that Shakespeare is difficult, and I would sort of maybe say, by way of meeting them halfway, that yes, the first time you read Shakespeare is difficult. So the first Shakespeare play that you read is going to be tough until you get used to the language. But once you do that, it's like riding a bike. And once you do that, it's not difficult at all. So you make the necessary effort, you plunge in, you get yourself wet to read the first Shakespeare play, and then the second one's going to be much easier, and then you'll be reading Shakespeare as easily as you read everybody else. And you mentioned the Odyssey, more things being revealed to you. A great work of literature is something which is alive. And one of the tests of that is that every time you return to it, you're seeing it afresh. There's new things in it that you hadn't really noticed either at all or in the fullness of their place within the whole. That you can always reread a great work of literature because it's a living thing that's going to come alive in your hands. So that's the test. If you've read something and you go back to say, well, I don't need to do this again. It's probably because it's not a great work of literature. It might have just told a reasonable story that kept you interested till the end, but you're not going to be interested in picking it up again. The great works, that isn't true. I mean, all of those books, would be more than happy to read again, and I hope to God that I'll have the time to do it.
Yeah, I had to actually pull back with some of those works that as I was reading them recently and remind myself that they're actually not the Bible because they're so deep and I was starting to focus on details and figure out like what is exactly going on right here. And oftentimes it was significant, but then I had to kind of say, well, okay, but it's not divinely inspired, so it doesn't have to have meaning in every single word necessarily. But yeah, it's just beautiful how well these great books have been put together, though.
When you encounter a young student, perhaps a high schooler or a person embarking upon reading the great books, what sort of advice do you give them? What encouragement would you have for them? How do you like to get them going in that direction?
I often talk about what we can glean from reading St. Thomas Aquinas about how we actually grow into the fullness of reality. And it's a fivefold. I sometimes call them the five metaphysical senses, but they're sequential. So physical senses obviously all simultaneously, right? We can hear and see, so the five metaphysical senses, and we get this from Aquinas and other people, begins with humility. And if you have humility, you have a sense of gratitude. You have a sense of gratitude, your eyes will be open in wonder. And it's only when your eyes open in wonder, you move to contemplation. And it's only when you move to contemplation, you experience dilation, dilatatio, the opening of the mind and the soul into the fullness of reality. So what I hope to do with my students is to help their eyes open in wonder. What you can't do, of course, is to give them humility. Right? That's a gift that they have to pray for and work on. But once they have humility, they will have that sense of gratitude. And so with humility and gratitude, all that I want to do is to help them open their eyes in wonder by showing them wonderful things. Now, that can be something physically in creation, such as a sunset. You just teach them to, if you want to see, you have to look. So to teach people to look so that they can see. And of course, what's true of the natural environment, the natural world, God's creation, is also true of human subcreation, of the great works of art that we've produced in literature, visual arts, music, that we have to, if you like, approach them on our knees. And if we approach them on our knees, then we will have that sense of wonder, and it will lead us to contemplation, and it will allow our hearts and minds to open into the fullness of reality. And that's what I really hope with students, is to kindle in them that sense of wonder which can lead them to contemplation and dilation.
Okay. We've kind of recently I've seen some of the fruits of that inspiring wonder, I guess, because it seems like, in our household, we have lots of discussions about great works of literature and philosophy and history. And we used to have like college students coming over and there'd be discussions. And then as some of my oldest children got to the point where they could read them, there'd be these long discussions with my children at the dinner table or whatever. And I'm seeing now with my younger children, there's a hunger to kind of get in. They want to participate in these great conversations. They want to pick up the books now. And so it seems like as parents, and it's modeling is something important for our kids to, because we're doing this, if we're passionate about reading great literature, discussing it with our friends and with the family, then it's hard. It's hard, I think, for the kids not to just get that hunger as well. They know how good this could be if they just jump in. That's recent experience from our house.
Yeah, sometimes, if you've got several children, and you're having a conversation with the older ones, you think that the younger ones are just sort of passive wallpaper. This is not really for them, and you're sort of ignoring them. But actually, on the contrary, that of course they can't grasp everything that's being said, but they can have something enkindled within them, a desire to be like their parents or their older siblings, and to be able to discuss these things. So even if they can't, great seeds of desire for the good and the true and the beautiful are being planted there. And as of course they flower, those seeds come to fruition as they grow up. They're going to naturally, fall into the same sort of discussions about the great books, etc., because it's part of the living environment that they basically the air that they breathe. So even if they're in the background, apparently doing something else, subconsciously or consciously, they're aware of the conversations they may not fully understand, and that is itself sort of planting seeds within them. So I think you just need to be aware of that. So obviously you mentioned the word modeling. That's crucial, and of course it in both senses. If we behave badly, then that also is planting seeds. So we do have to work on our own lives of virtue as well, so that we are good examples to our children.
What guidance or encouragement would you have for parents or teachers who are getting pushback either from their students or from others who think these books are too difficult or irrelevant?
Well, that's good. I've experienced that in various ways. I won't go into details. You know the adage: you can take a horse to water, you can't make it drink. So what you have to do if there's pushback is you have to try to make them understand that they're speaking from a position of ignorance, of fear, and not from the fruit of experience or wisdom. And if they continue to sort of be obstreperous and obstructive, then they're going to be losing out. But you can't force someone. In fact, there's a danger, that people. I know lots of people that hate Shakespeare because of the way it was taught to them, and that's largely because modern teachers do things. It's what I call Shakespeare abuse. They subject Shakespeare to ideology and the latest fads and fashions, which is Shakespeare would not have even heard of most of these things that they're trying to read things about. But also it's just sometimes it's ignorance or the teacher themselves is not interested. And and the students can pick that up very easily. That the teacher, whether it's a parent or teacher, is going through the motions. It's going to engender indifference or antagonism on the part of the students. So we also have to be passionate about the things we want them to be passionate about. We can't fake it. So, if we want our children, our students to love something, we need to be loving it ourselves. And if it's something which is not really lovable, or shouldn't be loved because it's poisonous or pernicious, then perhaps we shouldn't be teaching it.
Okay.
As we've been talking, I have kind of an unfair question, I guess, to ask. Just as you've got 50 books in this book, but if someone were to only have time to read one book in their life, other than the Bible, in one of these books, do you have a favorite? Do you have a book that you'd say you have to read? You must read this. Your life isn't complete if you haven't read this book.
Well, there's two things about that question before I endeavour to answer it, and I will. But I think that we need to state define our terms. So first of all, we have to understand between objective and subjective. So to say, what do I think is the best is not necessarily the same as saying which is my favorite, right? Because the latter is a subjective judgment, the other is at least an effort, an objective judgment. And the other thing that makes it difficult to ask is that I would, if I'm saying what should you read as opposed to what would I like to read, I need to know more about you. So so people say, what's the first Chesterton book I should read, right? And I said, well, you're interested in fiction, non-fiction, poetry or prose, economics or theology or history. I have to know more about them before I can give them an answer. Well, this is probably the first book you should read as an individual by Chesterton because of your own predilections. So having given those caveats, I would say that for me, objectively, the greatest work of literature that's ever written, probably in terms of its magnificence, is the Divine Comedy. So, if you can only read one work of literature, then I would probably say that. Although I would say that nobody should only read one work of literature. But if you're on this, this mythical desert island, all you have is the Bible in one book, then. What I also say by way of cheating when I'm asked that question, yes, I have the Bible and the complete works of William Shakespeare.
Yes.
It's cheating, but that would certainly do it for me because I could certainly read Shakespeare forever. But no, the Divine Comedy I would say is the best as regards my favourite of those 50. Either Hamlet, King Lear, or The Lord of the Rings. How about that?
Oh, very good.
Of the books in your list, what are people finding most surprising?
Yeah, so I again, what criteria we're judging by? So the point of view of the two books by living authors, people probably haven't heard of, and do they deserve to be canonized? No, they don't. I've already given the reason why they're in there to show it's a living tradition. But I think from the Lord of the Rings backwards, backwards in time, I think all of those books that are in there are canonical. They are authentically great books, which means that they're all worth reading. Which one should be surprising? I can't really see why any of them should be a surprise.
Okay.
The one book that sticks out a bit like a sore thumb in relation to my definition of a great book in the introduction, I talk about that logically there were 4 types of books. There were good books, good bad books, bad good books, and bad books, in the sense that a book can be good in terms of the the truth that it conveys. It can be true in terms of its theology, its philosophy, etc. But bad possibly in terms of art. It's not necessarily well written. It's not a great story. It's not told very well. The character, the characters are not very realistic, or not very deep, not very multifaceted. So it's a bad work of literature, even if it's got good morality. So that would be a good bad book, you know. So yes, it's good as morals, but it's not good literature. So you know what I argue in that is that really, as there are so many good books, and I have only picked, you know, that's just the I could have chosen another 50, but no problem, and they would have been as well known. So that why read anything but good books? Those which are good in terms of art, beauty, but also in terms of the truth that they convey. But the one I say must take a bit of a sore thumb, according to my own criteria, I argue that Paradise Lost is a good bad book. In other words, it's very good as literature. It's a great epic poem in the same spirit as Homer. Yeah, I would argue that you probably get closer to an understanding of authentic truth by reading Homer than if you read Paradise Lost by Milton, because Milton's a Puritan. He's a Unitarian. He doesn't seem to believe in the Trinitarian God. The character of the sun in the epic is a creature, not part of a triune God. Indeed, a large part of Satan's animosity towards the son is jealousy, because he's a usurper, this sort of new favorite that the father has. And so it's and of course, Satan is a dynamic character, or an anti-hero, and a very great courage. When the rest of the demons in hell don't have the courage to go on the guerrilla operation, underground operation, to sort of sneak your way into Eden and defy God. Satan takes it upon himself. He leads from the front, if you like, at least from the bottom. There's a sense in which there's an aspect of the heroic, albeit the tragic heroic, in the character of Milton's Satan. Very different from Dante's, where Satan is stuck in a cold sea of ice at the bottom of hell with an insatiable appetite and weeping. That static evil, that reality of evil, not the dynamism that Milton portrays. But it's a great work. It's a great work of literature. But we have to be warned, I think, about the bad theology and philosophy that animates it.
Helpful to have that. At this point, what are you looking forward to? Projects or endeavors or whatever else that you can tell us about?
Well, I sometimes say that when I die, there will be hundreds of books I haven't read and wanted to, and dozens of books I haven't written and wanted to. So there's not going to be a shortage of books that I'd like to write. There's certainly somewhat of a shortage of time to write them. You mentioned earlier on about the various other things I do besides writing, and even the writing, it's much more remunerative to write journalism than to write books. And I don't have a salaried position. I haven't had for 3 years, so I have to earn a living for my family through my pen, basically, largely, and also my spoken word through teaching online and speaking. So I find myself writing for 4, 5, 6 journals fairly regularly. It limits the amount, especially if I'm traveling to give talks, it limits the amount of time I have to write books, and that can become somewhat frustrating, because my wife will tell anybody who will listen that I'm never happier, and therefore never easier to live with, I'm sure, than when I'm actually writing a book. If I can just go upstairs and just work on the book, that's when I'm at my most peaceful. So that's if I could do what I liked. Of course, it's not good for us to do what we like. If I could do what I liked, I just write books for the rest of my life. But I certainly, I won't bore you with the books that I hope to write. Hopefully that some of them will at least come to fruition. I do have a new book that will be coming out in the autumn, so I can at least announce that, because that's finalized. That would be Ignatius Press as well. And actually, I don't know if you've heard of the group, the organization Exodus 90. So it's a men's ministry, mission, apostolate. And they asked me to write 48 short reflections on great literature for men. So I did that, and then after I did it, I said, "Would you mind if I sort of see if a publisher would be interested in this?" And they were very happy with that. So this book's going to be called Great Literature for Good Men, and it's 48 short reflections on literature. There's a section on Tolkien, Middle Earth. There's a section on Chesterton. There's a section on poetry. And there's a section, I think, on other great books. I think 4 sections of 12 reflections each, and that's going to be out by Ignatius Press in the autumn.
Look forward to that. Are there things that we haven't gotten to yet that you want to be sure we cover today?
Well, I would encourage people that like what I do, that are interested in what I do, to check out my personal website, jpearce.co. And the reason for that is it's the one-stop place for everything I do and write. So, for instance, if I mentioned about the 4, 5, 6 journals that I write for regularly, well, as soon as those essays are published by the journals in question, I get the link. I post the link to my personal website, so people can just go there for everything rather than be looking all over the place for me. So that's easy. Same thing with this. I mean, if as and when or if, please, you send me the link for this, I will also post that on my website. So interviews I do, speeches I give, the Authority podcast series I did for TAN, that all of that's on my website. So if people would just want to follow with what I'm doing, keep up with me, then that's the easiest way of doing it, jpearce.co.
Good deal.
I do have a follow-up question then, Bonnie, since you opened the door.
Please do.
I'm sure we have a lot of Kolbe students, at least, who are aspiring writers, and certainly you have, as we've talked about, you've produced many books and have many more to come. What's your process for, you said going upstairs and having this, excited, but what's your process for writing? How do you keep writing? I mean, with a love for writing, obviously, but do you have a particular process that you go through?
Yeah, well, I sometimes talk about the 3 things that are necessary for a good writer are inspiration, aspiration, and perspiration. Obviously, you have to have the inspiration. That involves a relationship with God, because the creative process is something. That's why Homer, beginning the Iliad, sing muse. He begins with a prayer to the muse, in other words, to the giver of the creative gifts. We would call it grace. The grace of God. Our creative work should be prayer and praise. I sometimes say that human creation should be giving back to the giver of the gift, the fruits of the gift given. So in that sense, our work as writers should be at the absolute heart of our spiritual life, that writing is prayer and praise. So that's the inspiration. The aspiration, of course, should be to give back the fruits of the gift to the giver of the gift, but then obviously to have that magnified through its being read by others. So you shouldn't be writing purely for mercenary reasons, although of course you do. It's absolutely legitimate to earn money for your family. And then the perspiration. So this is absolutely essential. So I discipline myself that I will be upstairs in my office by about 8 o'clock. If I don't sleep, I might be up in my office at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. But generally, 8 o'clock, and then I will work right through to when I'm called down for dinner, sometime between 6 and 7. I probably won't really bother with lunch. I'll just keep going. I'll go to the gym. On a good day, I'll take a break to go to the gym, because the other thing I absolutely believe in is every day you have to have spiritual fitness, so prayer life. Mental fitness, so intellectual activity, but also physical fitness, because our bodies are a temple of the Holy Spirit. So I talk about a healthy trinity of this sort of equilateral triangle, where you find time every day for spiritual fitness, intellectual fitness, and physical fitness. So the intellectual fitness takes care of itself with what I'm doing. That's just what I'm doing takes care of that. But I do have to then make sure that my spiritual life, my prayer life, is not being squeezed out, and that my physical exercise is not being squeezed out. So it's about keeping things like that in balance. But the most important thing is discipline. The perspiration requires discipline, and don't make the big mistake that I don't feel like it today. The muse is not visiting me. I don't feel inspired. Get up there and work. And on a bad day, you might only write 1,200 words, and it might not be all that good, and you might have to spend first couple of hours the next day making it better. That's a bad day. And another day you might write 3,000 or 4,000 words and it might be great. But the point is, get up there, because the moment you allow yourself to say, I don't feel like it today, that's going to become a habit. Once it becomes a habit, you're in trouble.
Habits, yeah, that's great. I love that.
Yep. There's a lot there that we can draw upon in our daily doings. Okay. All right. Any other final thoughts or takeaways?
Well, no, except that obviously it's been a joy to be with you, and I'm so pleased that you're still going strong after 200 episodes since the last time I was on your show here on the podcast. And I would say if you leave it for another 200, I'm going to be somewhat hunched up by that point. That's the end of my age.
Oh, I don't know about that. You got a pretty good routine going. I think you'd be in good shape then, but we would welcome you back well before then, of course. It's really been great visiting with you again. Our show notes will have a link to your website, jpearce.co. It's not .com, it's .co, jpearce.co, and as well as links to the book we talked about today. I'm going to also include a link to episode 144 of the Kolbecast with Mark Brumley of Ignatius Press, and some others that have come up along the way in the course of our conversation today. So listeners can head there when they're finished listening to this. We sure do appreciate you taking the time with us today, Joseph, and wish you all the best. And we look forward to seeing what's yet to come. So thanks again for coming today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. God bless you.
Subscribe to the Kolbecast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolbe.org.
Mary, our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, St. Ignatius of Loyola, holy saints and angels, pray for us. Ad maiorem Dei gloriam.